Okay, I'm trying to record this little video lecture for you guys. I keep messing it up. So this is like take 4, which is appropriate because it's week 4. So hello, welcome to Critical Thinking. We're going to talk about reasoning in the grapes of wrath, or the grapes of Wath, as I like to call it. So chapter 7 of the grapes of wrath is what you call an intercalary chapter, meaning it's not part of the narrative, but it helps to contextualize the story and to build the atmosphere, the context of the other characters' lives within their greater world. So it's a good place to kind of pose questions. And you can see the author sort of asking us, well, what were other people's perspective on these people? Um, So I kind of came up with my own questions here, and I thought I could explore them, talk a little bit about them, and how they relate to reasoning as it's discussed in Chapter 4 of Asking the Right Questions. So, my first question there, how does the owner of the used car lot in Chapter 7 of The Grapes of Wrath defend his approach to the California-bound tenant farmers who are looking to buy his vehicles? And in that first part of chapter 4 in Browne and Keeley, you see the heading initiating the questioning process, which basically means ask why. Why does this man feel entitled to take advantage of poor people who are looking to survive? Why is his own survival threatened, or why does he perceive it to be threatened? Um, how does he make the customer's use of his time a significant part of his argument? If you look on page 36 of Asking the Right Questions, Browne and Keeley are talking about reasoning is usually being set up as this because of that. And there's this quote, which you may have noticed, just flew in, um, from the text that I think supports that question, where the voice of the chapter is saying, we assume to someone who works for him, get them under obligation. Make them take up your time. Don't let them forget they're taking your time. People are nice mostly. They hate to put you out. Make them put you out and then sock it to them. So let's try and paraphrase that, okay? If we make people believe they've taken up our time, they'll be more obligated to buy a car. What other reasons is he offering as behavior for this business? You know, why does he think it's okay to sort of rip people off, which is what he's doing here, right? In Browne and Keeley on page 37, there's this discussion of different types of arguments and the way that they're generally supported. So, descriptive arguments about how the world is tend to be supported by, or we expect, if we're going to be convinced by them, that they're supported by evidence. And prescriptive arguments, generally, we're told on page 37, are usually supported by descriptive statements about the world and then evidence. So there's usually kind of a hierarchy when you get into how the world should be. It's usually supported as, well, because this is that way, and we can prove it because we have such and such evidence to do so. Right? So that's a pretty basic breakdown of how arguments are put together. But what they also say um, is that arguments are more complicated than that. So, like in this argument, for example, descriptive statements are supporting a descriptive conclusion, right? Like they'll be more obligated to buy a car is our conclusion. Why are they going to be more obligated to buy a car? Because we made them believe that they've taken up our time. So when we make people believe that they've taken up our time, this is a possibility in the universe. It's a given that we're going to be able to do this, right? It is tied into, though, beliefs about how we should behave. And this is where these ideas about how people are and how they want to be come up. So, my point here, and this kind of goes back to whether or not this guy's argument is convincing, is that it might be hard to kind of, as your book says, keep the reasons and the conclusions straight. You know, they'll feel obligated is just one part of the thoughts of this character. in this kind of obsessive monologue he has, which keeps coming back to wishing he had more and more and more jalopies. So think about what his larger argument is. Is it, I want jalopies, jalopies are great? Or is there something else that he's thinking about here, that he's making a case for here? And maybe there's not just one argument, right? So think about the message that he's sending overall, which in many cases is not directly stated and is not carefully marked when you get to the reasons and the conclusion by therefore and because. You got to read between the lines. So this is where we kind of get into unpacking things like why this is effective for his customer base. And here's where we can kind of bring in the concept of difference, right? Because if you're talking about class, right? Who are his customers? His customer base are these people wandering in, bewildered, needing a car. This is not far from the quote in the text about how to make them feel like they've taken up your time. So that's a question of class, right? People are wandering in, bewildered, needing a car. And you can think about if you're using a cognitive map approach, which is something that's discussed in the Bedford Handbook section you should be skimming through this week, that there's other ideas that are connected to this notion of class, right? Like, what do the characters say while they're shopping? Can't pay a nickel over 75 or there won't be enough to get to California, right? This indicates something about class. So my question to you is, what does it indicate exactly, right? There's that question of difference. Who's different here? The person selling the cars and the person trying to buy one, right? And that's also part of a larger question of difference in class. Why is this man so obsessed with being able to rip off the people who are trying to get out to California? There must be some way that he's not comfortable, that in the class system, he's not necessarily that high up either, right? So that's one kind of lens that you can take to this. Steinbeck offers other lenses, though, right? He also brings up the question of gender. And we see that when, we hear characters like our major character in this chapter say things like, watch the woman's face. If the woman likes it, we can screw the old man. And I won't unpack that. I'll let you think about it. How are you going to unpack that? How does that demonstrate a point that Steinbeck is making about gender? And there's two ways to think about that, right? How does this character think about women and men? And why does he think that influencing a woman affects the ability to sell the car to the man, right? And then the other side of that is what's Steinbeck trying to say? So there's, the character's perspective and there's the author's perspective. And then there's our perspective. And that's really the most important thing as far as I'm concerned. What's your perspective and how are you going to convey that in your journal, which is your first major writing assignment and it's due at the end of this week. So keep going through the week 4 page on Blackboard and let me know if you have any questions about your first major writing assignment of the week, which is your journal. Okay? Take care.